Thank you very much for inviting me to come along today and talk to you. But also thank you very much for running this series. I've come to these things on and off over the last 3 years, I think. And it's been one of the first, in fact, one of the only places to where we have an open forum to talk about some of these sort of engagement and impact activities. So I've really appreciated that. Thanks very much. I'm going to talk a bit about the background and sort of context of this subject. My experience is that I basically managed the impact submission from the university to the REF last November. Before that, I was working in the School of Global Studies on enabling their research to become impactful. And before that, I was working in a research centre, again on what our funder, DFID, called research uptake, so getting research into use, mainly in the policy sphere. So I'm mainly going to be talking about the impact side of this topic today, not so much about the creative side, although I'll talk about some specific examples where we can see both. So why are we thinking about this? Why are we talking about this topic? I've chosen some fairly random pictures to encapsulate why we're talking about this, and 2 of these are about the obligation for talking about impact, and 2 of them are to do with the opportunity for talking about impact. So we all know that governments and taxpayers are increasingly thinking hard about how budgets are spent, and so they're looking for benefits from their research investment. And as a result, researchers are increasingly under pressure to show how their work's important. So this is partly in the REF, the government's assessment of university research, partly through pathways to impact that you're expected to complete in some of your grant proposals, and also in other obligations from specific funders. And this is likely to increase. It's not likely to go away. This year in the REF, impact accounted for 20% of the grade that departments will be given, which is going to indicate how the money is split across different universities. Next time it's probably going to be 25%. And there may be other ways in which that is expanded as well, perhaps by requiring more case studies for each department or something. When I googled government spending money to get some pictures, Google prompts you to say, it prompts you with what you might be looking for. The first 2 things it came up with: spending government money on useless things, spending government money on stupid things. And actually the picture of money going down the toilet was from a website on top 10 wasteful government programmes. And 4 of those were research projects, including one where scientists were making a robot squirrel to investigate why rattlesnakes rarely attack squirrels that wag their tails. So I think there might be some work to do here. The second 2 pictures at the bottom are more to do with the opportunity that researchers have to show impact from their work, which is really about why you do this, why you want, about ways in which you can show that your research is significant. It's about ways in which you can show that your research can make a difference. And these 2 pictures I've chosen to demonstrate 2 particular projects which do that. So the photograph on the left is migrants in an Italian detention camp. And this is really a reference to the work of Melanie Friend. I should say at this point that I'm going to talk a lot about other people's research, which is not necessarily the best place to be. It's not necessarily a comfortable place to be. Those people who I'm talking extensively about, I let them know I was going to do this in case they wanted to come along and correct me publicly. But I would say that if there's anyone here who knows more about any of this than I do, please tell me where I go wrong. But Melanie Friend is a photographer. She's put together an exhibition called Border Country. So she interviews, and she's got a very, very unusual level of access in detention centres. She's photographed and recorded people in detention, and she's used that to illustrate the personal perspective of detainees and the reality of what detention is really like. And that's been used it's been presented in exhibitions, but it's also been used to train lawyers, to prepare people who are going to be visiting detention centres. It's been used in activist campaigns and to build public understanding of the situation of immigration detainees. This was one of the case studies that we actually submitted to the REF this year. On the right, a picture of somebody looking at some paintings actually at the Tate. This is to represent the work of Sussex art historian David Mellor. He's rescued the artist Bruce Lacey from obscurity, essentially. And as a result of that, this has encouraged the Tate to acquire some works from Bruce Lacey and to acquire his archive. So preserving this and presenting it for all of us for generations to come. So thinking about the impact of research in that way is a way to think about how it can make a difference in the world. But most of my experience, as I say, comes from the first of these, and so that's mainly what I'm going to be talking about. That's a bit of an excuse because the next few slides look a bit dry. It will get better towards the end, but the next few are a little bit dry. So I want to consider a bit what the question of what is impact, and it already seems a bit like an old chestnut to ask that question, but I think it's worth us trying to make sense of the discussion by at least starting from roughly the same place. So this definition, the demonstrable contribution that excellent research makes to society and the economy, is the definition used by RC UK. So this sort of underpins a lot of the expectations that research councils have when you're putting together pathways to impact, for example. So that's, so far so depressing really in terms of what that means for creative outputs. So let's have a look at the Arts and Humanities Research Council, which we might think would have a slightly different approach. However, there's a long list of potential impacts here to do with individuals, organisations and nations. There's a lot about economic performance at a global level, at a UK level, and then increasing the effectiveness of public services and policy. And creative output is there, but really it feels a bit like it's tagged on at the end, so there's not much more to be positive about there, perhaps. This is the gloss that ESRC puts on that RC UK definition, and in this paragraph they're focusing on about making what you do demonstrable. Impact must be demonstrable. That's the bit that they're talking about here. So because it's the ESRC, they say that it's not just enough to focus on your activities and your outputs, for example, putting on a conference or publishing a report. You have to provide evidence of research impact, and they give some examples in policy and practice. And although this is perhaps not directly relevant to many impacts that come from creative outputs, I think it's very important to bear in mind that when we're thinking about impact, we're not thinking about the activities that researchers are doing. What we want to really think about and understand is the effect it has on other people, the effect that it has on people who are going to benefit from the research in one way or another. And this is one of the reasons why it's very difficult to think and talk about impact and capture it, because it happens outside our domain, it's outside the institution, so it's not something that we are necessarily going to know about without a lot of effort. This is the definition which is the sort of the nub of impact for the REF. So this is the definition we had to work to when we were creating case studies and submitting them to the REF. So they're looking at a change or benefit to the economy, society, culture, public policy or services, health, the environment or quality of life, and they're obviously looking beyond academia. I mean, it goes without saying that they also want to have an impact within academia, and for the REF that means that any impacts have to be underpinned by research which is considered to be at least 2-star quality. So that raises a whole load of other challenges and questions about how impact happens, but there's the regulations. And again, this isn't not a very encouraging definition in terms of thinking about creativity. So if we have a slightly closer look in REF terms, the REF is assessed by 4 different panels for each different group of departments. So there's a panel A, which looks at sort of biomedical sciences, panel B, science, panel C, broadly social science, and panel D, arts and humanities. So if we have a look at what panel D says about impacts that arise from cultural activity. So Hefke says it's looking for benefits on culture, and panel C expands that in its indicative range of impacts. And again, it talks a lot about economic impacts, policy impacts, but when it's talking about cultural life, this is what it says. Impacts on cultural life can include creating and interpreting cultural capital, and I'm sure there could be a PhD written about what cultural capital is if there hasn't already, in all of its forms to enrich and expand the lives, imaginations and sensibilities of individuals and groups. Now this sounds like we're kind of getting more there. I mean, it's a tall order, but at least you can kind of see where that might fit in. They also provide us with some other examples of what this sort of impact might include. Generating new ways of thinking that influence creative practice, creating, inspiring and supporting new forms of artistic, linguistic, social, economic and religious expression, and preserving, conserving and presenting cultural heritage, which is obviously where the Bruce Lacey case study fits in. So we can see that there are some ways in, some routes in, even if they are, quite ambitious. I mean, creating new forms of artistic expression, for example, you can read from one of those, which is obviously a tall order. But so what does this mean? Working to this, what does this mean at the sort of coalface of excavating case studies for the REF? I'm not a scientist. I've got a degree in English and a second degree in migration studies. I'm very excited to even have a chart in my presentation. But this is not put together scientifically at all. I mean, I've basically counted the case studies we've got. We've submitted 72 from Sussex, plus one that we wrote with Brighton for the medical school. And I've allocated each of those case studies to one different area. And these 6 areas are broadly what all the panels agree are sort of the areas where you can have impact. And I think that this chart actually we can be quite optimistic about it in terms of creative outputs. 21% of our impacts fall under the area of culture and society. So they're not all from creative outputs, but they fall into that bracket. And if you think about the definitions that we've been talking about and their emphasis on economic and policy impacts, and then look at the comparison between impacts on culture and impacts in the economic and commercial sphere, I think we can see that there is perhaps something to be optimistic about there. Pretty much everything else is broadly in the area of policy, and this was always going to be the area where we had most impact. Sussex is very active in this area. Panel C is the biggest panel. We submitted most case studies to Panel C. But they don't fall out necessarily like that into the different panels. I think that this does show that assessment in this area could be a benefit. It could be a benefit for people working in this area because it can highlight benefits of this sort of research to society beyond the economic. It emphasises different sorts of impact that can happen, and it has the potential to raise the profile of this sort of work. And I can certainly vouch for the fact that within the university this is the case already, that the number of case studies in this area are having a high profile, and they will do in further sort of publicity activities that the university is involved with around this. So now I'd like to have a look at a few actual examples of impact in this area. This is the first example. So up there, number 1, this is Tim Hopkins, who's a researcher in music. He's an artistic director and a designer. And he's got a particular interest in combining live performance and digital media in site-specific context. So as a result of his research, he was approached by the BBC Proms to put together a project to celebrate John Cage's centenary, and Music Walk is the project that he developed. And it consists of 10 pieces of music by 10 different composers, performed at 10 different sites around the Albert Hall. So picture number 2 shows one of those composers, Alvin Curran, and he's standing next to the site of his piece of music, which is the Albert Hall loading bay. So his piece of work is called DJ Albert Spins Cage and Cardew, performed in the loading bay. I'll just read you a little bit about what this is. I've actually downloaded this piece of music, and it's very engaging, very charming thing to listen to. I can't quite imagine what it would be like listening to it in the loading bay of the Royal Albert Hall, but I'm sure that would add to it. So this piece of music is the London Sinfonietta Academy performing a fragment of Curran's Triadic Limbo, with cinema verite-like rehearsal takes of the score's sequences of dysfunctional tonal triads. Cardew is heard reading fragments from Stockhausen's Certain Imperialism, his denunciation of bourgeois music. Cage erupts in his classic Zen laughter. A disembodied disco beat pattern, which is Curran playing on a leather sofa and a chair at home, comes and goes. Samples of improvised sax music and farmyard geese break in with fleeting commentary. So it's definitely worth having a listen to. Number 3 there is the website from this project, and I've put that picture up because I think it's a good example of showing how this project has engaged with its users, as it were. It's the people who have taken part in this. So you can download a playlist of this music, you can download the map, but also you can participate. You can upload your own recording of Silence, for example. John Cage, I understand, is famous for a recording of Silence, and you can upload your own recording of Silence. You can follow the John Cage tweet bot, which automatically tweets thoughts from the brain of John Cage. You can choose to listen to the music randomly. So this website is a way of encouraging other people to engage, but also it allows you to see what people are doing with your project, how they're engaging with it, how they're responding to it. You can count the number of followers you have, you can count the number of people who upload, and you can sort of follow their discussions about it. And the map here is the map that you can download to do this walk. So this map has been issued by Transport for London, and Transport for London very much enjoyed this project, and it is helping them deliver their policy objectives. So they are now rolling this project out across London as a way to encourage people to walk more. So they're going to use site-specific music to map London in a different way, and to encourage people to not use public transport but to walk around. So that's one of the ways in which it's achieved impact. The next example is one of my absolute favourites. I said I wasn't a scientist, but working on the REF has meant that I now love physics. This is not, it's a bit of a cheat because it's not actually creative outputs from the research, but it does reach into the creative sphere in ways that I'll talk to you about. There are a number of different impacts from this. So photograph 1 shows a number of researchers, including Antonella De Santo in the middle there, who were involved with the identification of the Higgs boson, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. So this generated exceptional interest right around the world because it challenged people's perceptions of the foundation of the universe. They've also carried out research which has underpinned some of the leading examples of citizen science. So again, it's not just about saying this is what we've done and people respond to it. It's about engaging people in a more two-way, proactive process. So the Galaxy Zoo project, which was partly underpinned by some research from Sussex, was about getting amateur astronomers to identify by eye different types of galaxies, which can really only be done by the human eye. But as there are, I'm going to say, billions of galaxies out there, you can't do it with one research team. So it's sort of outsourced to populations. And in terms of the sort of artistic and cultural activities, picture number 3 shows a play called Constellations, which was put on in the West End in 2012, and that's Rafe Spall and Polly Hawkins who are playing the lead characters. And this play was inspired by a branch of theoretical physics which suggests that at any one time there are multiple universes, multiple parallel universes in which, any number of versions of your life are being played out at the same time, and you can immediately think of the sort of dramatic implications of that. So it was this play specifically referred to a piece of Sussex research. In fact, Rafe Spall is playing an astronomer at Sussex, not a named one, but an imaginary one. And 2 of our physicists, Cathy Romer and Andrew Liddell, were scientific advisors to this play, and it was very critically well received. So again, there's some evidence. The reviews talk about it, talk about the science, the response of the audience. That's perhaps a site of evidence. Actually. I'm sorry?
It was a female that was a physicist, not male.
Was it?
Hawkins, yeah. I saw the play, it's great.
I didn't see it, I just read a review.
Just it's not nice to have a female physicist, not a...
Indeed. Well, yes, as we have many in Sussex. The picture number 4 is Richard Durrant, guitarist and composer. And he created an event for the Ada Festival from the research work of Philip Harris, who worked on experiments related to the origins of matter in the universe. And they worked on a piece of music which generated notes from experimental data. And then this music accompanied a lecture with the intention that the audience would experience science in a new way. The event was then followed by a question and answer session where the audience sort of explained their reaction to it, and they had a discussion about that. My last example is from IR. Picture number 1 is Cindy Webber, who's an academic and filmmaker. And she was inspired by this picture number 2 here, which is the American Ad Council's public service announcement called I Am an American, which was released after the September 11, 2001 attacks. And it consisted of a number of different Americans in different settings with saying the words, I am an American, over some stirring music, designed to foster a sense of unity in the population. And Cindy decided that she wanted to deconstruct this idea somewhat. So she made a series of films featuring people who were excluded from this melting pot, as it were, those who she described as being unmeltable. This person here in the film that I've shown, number 3, was a Muslim army chaplain who was wrongly accused of being an enemy combatant. And there are a number of similar films that she's made. I think there's 7 or 8 films in this series. They're online if anyone wants to look at them. They're worth looking at. But once she'd made the film, she basically put together a roadshow. So she went out and took the films and photographs ran a series of exhibitions. She did a number of media appearances. She engaged in debate with hosts of radio shows, but also in phone-ins. And along the way, she collected thousands of responses and thoughts about her project. So the American flag up there, number 4, is made up of comment cards. And Cindy has specifically asked people to respond and reflect on what the films make them think, how they feel about it, and her professorial lectures online, and you can see in there that she talks a bit about this and how this has happened. So she is collecting basically evidence of her impact in this way. She's collecting feedback about how people have changed what they think by the outputs of her research, and as a result of that, The work's been acquired by the September 11 Memorial Museum in New York as a way to capture diverse responses to the war on terror. So, in summary, this is a list of all of those case studies that fit into the culture and society chunk of the chart I showed you. And I'd just like to end by sort of recapping on what I think some of the benefits of this sort of work might be. I mean, I think I've mentioned that I think there is some benefit to the process of assessment in the way that it highlights the result impacts from creative outputs. There's likely to be a higher profile of this sort of work after the REF, and there certainly is in the university. It's also going to lead to potentially some better resources to enable you to make a difference with your research. Primarily, this is going to be initially through Pathways to Impact currently, and my colleague Christina has some experience in supporting researchers to do that. But also, as impact becomes a departmental and university priority, then there's the potential for wider access to resources. And I'd like to end on the fact that we must remember that in terms of creating impact, we have to focus on outcomes outside the institution and not spend too much time thinking about what we're doing ourselves. And lastly, remember to hold on to the evidence.
Thank you very much.